I wish we had a police station. We don't have that. We have a post office, which is great. When we bought our place, these were the considerations that we took into consideration before we moved here. It's nice to have a small community feeling, and I love what Chief Young does with all the decorations during Christmas time, the toy drive that happens. I'm kind of on the fence about the fireworks. We'll leave that alone. But otherwise, I think we have a great response time. I mean, we had a fire right in the house on Oak Drive, and the fire department was there within seconds. I mean, we literally saw the fire rage through 2 houses, and our property is right next to that, and we were literally, my husband was there driving his tractor back and forth, and I was hosing down the building. It was great to see that we have a fire department literally in town who's there responding. We can't see the future, but what we have right now, I think we should protect. Same thing with the landscaping of our little downtown. I don't understand why people want to tear that down either. We need to build, I think, a community, a sense of community, a sense of coming together. And I think these little small institutions are what makes that happen. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other public comment? Nope. All right, we'll go back to the board. This was just a discussion. Do we need anything from the board?
If I can clarify something as I was sitting here, I think I misunderstood Director Green's question to apply to the dissolution and not annexation. And so, yes, if what Scott's proposing to do is the fire chief to form a fire district, then there certainly would be a fire board. That would be the district board. I was like thinking in terms of the dissolution. If we dissolve all services before that happens, I don't know where that goes and what the services are going to be provided through.
I can't see this community without a full-time fire department. We've been depending on volunteers for a long time, and it's got to be getting harder and harder and harder and harder to get people to want to be involved. And I would never vote for not having a manned fire department. Just wouldn't do it. And I don't know why everybody thinks that was what I was attacking. It just didn't make any sense. Never my intention.
Okay. Do you need anything else from us? Okay. We'll move along. Discussion on formation of an ad hoc committee or standing committee to review all district projects. Discuss ad hoc versus standing committee purpose, formation, reporting, authority.
So this was a discussion item requested by Director Green, seconded by Director Director Davis, and seconded by Director Sangster. Pardon me. The request came based on a discussion of forming a committee to review all of the district projects, some kind of public committee, and I thought it was important to discuss the difference between an ad hoc committee and a standing committee and what the requirements are for that, so that you can decide how and when you want to create such committees, and if you do want to create such a committee for the purpose of reviewing district, like public works projects, I think is what you're referring to, but we could dial that in. So the primary difference between an ad hoc committee and a standing committee is an ad hoc committee is made up of no more than 2 board members. So you delegate to 2 board members to go investigate or have meetings or do whatever it is that the will of the board would like to not have a meeting on every month. Rather, you'd have 2 board members go and take care of something and bring back reports. It is for a specific subject matter, and it is for a temporary purpose. So you would never have a standing ad hoc committee of 2 board members. Otherwise, they could be subject to Brown Act requirements, which means you're just forming more meetings, right, for public meetings. For a standing committee, that's where you can bring in members of the community, members of staff. It can be made up of whomever this board would like the committee to be made up of. And those are subject to Brown Act requirements. So those standing committees would have their own separate meetings where they get together and they're advisory only. They don't take action, they don't make decisions on behalf of the board, but they usually vet out information information situations. They can help direct staff on gathering information that they think is important for the board in order to take action, and then would advise the board on what they recommend as far as action. Or they can be in an informational committee where it's just their job to go out and gather the information. They have meetings and discuss it, and then they bring it back to the board periodically if that's what you need for a certain task or project. And they can be long-term. They do not have to be temporary. And they can have a kind of a wider subject matter.
Okay. And just to clarify for the public, neither a standing nor an ad hoc committee has any authority to make any decisions. They bring information back to the board. I think there's a lot of discussion that's going on in the community where they think that anyone that's involved in an ad hoc or standing committee is making decisions. And the reality is that an ad hoc committee is something that's temporary. So for example, we wanted to have like a balloon festival in the park, and 2 board members were assigned to find out how much balloons are or who can provide balloon services. Their task is to bring that information back to the board to decide whether we want to have a balloon party in the park. Whereas a standing committee would be, maybe we need to be on top of how the plants and trees are doing on mission. And that 2 board members would be there investigating irrigation and the condition of the foliage. And that's what they do, and they report back to the board. So I think there's some confusion as to what these committees would be for, what authority they have, and frankly, if it's not a benefit to the community, obviously it could be if there's something that we need information on as a board, and 2 people are willing to volunteer their time to gather that information. So that's all I have.
Can I make a comment?
Yes.
So when I started working for the district, we had standing committees. We had personnel and operations, finance and budget, equipment and facilities. So all of those became the outlet for 2 directors and the public to have extensive knowledge on those topics. Generally, in my observation, that information would be brought to the board in the sense of, hey, were you guys okay with that? Oh, okay, then there was no discussion on the board. So I would really caution the board against setting up committees just to have the same conversation that we can have at a board meeting, which is the primary driver for getting rid of the committees, so that the whole board was getting the same conversation. Because again, in my observation, the committee was getting 100% of the information, and only maybe 50% or 40% was making it to the board. And that's not necessarily a fault of the committee, but the rest of the board got complacent and wasn't asking the questions, and those discussions weren't being had at the board. So again, my caution would be to not have a committee where the whole board needs that information to make sure that the whole board is making the best decision for the community. Because this is the ultimate setting where the whole board is hearing the same information at the same time. The public is invited to hear the same information at the same time, and you can have a constructive conversation between all of the board members. Is there a place for ad hoc and standing committees? Yes. This is a very small district. We have a lot going on, but it's not a whole lot in comparison to other places like Cambria or Napomo or something like that. So, that's all.
Any questions, gentlemen?
Do you have any comments?
We will.
I got a question.
Yeah, I want to.
One moment. Go ahead.
I agree with Kelly. There's no reason to have a group, 2 or 3, an ad hoc or standing committee to go out and gather information, come back and report, because that's what we do at this meeting. We gather information is given to us. And if we have more questions, we bring it back for clarification, but I think it's a waste of time. So I agree with Kelly on that. That's my...
Yeah, sure. What was causing the information not being disseminated to the full board 100%? Why was it being filtered?
It wasn't being filtered per se, but the whole board was not there was not an active discussion between the committee members and the whole board. The whole board, in a lot of instances, was just saying, okay, like especially in the finance, and where we got into a lot of issues with finance, was They had the finance committee.
Right?
Those two board members and the public would decide on something or agree or not agree. And basically when that went to the whole board, it was, did you guys agree or not agree? And then that was the end of the discussion. It wasn't, yeah, we came up with this problem and this problem and this problem, or we had these solutions. Yeah, and that was essentially the same for all committees. And this is just my observation. But it doesn't mean that committees can't work. I think that there's a time and a place for everything like that. But in my preference would be for the whole board to hear the same thing at the same time. If we have a situation where we want to have an in-depth look at, whatever it is,
Let's take landscaping for an example.
like landscaping.
There's a lot of different opinions out there.
If we want to have an ad hoc committee to discuss landscaping and look at all the options, let's say yourself and Director Davis want to have an ad hoc committee to do that, then we can gather that more in-depth information, but then all that information should come back to the board.
Sure.
For the whole board to discuss.
Absolutely.
The whole board shouldn't just say, okay, you agreed to it. And that's that. And that's what was happening before. And that's what happens in a lot of different committees that I've seen. So I don't want that to happen again.
I just think that a committee is good because then people from the public gets input, and we're not burning staff time.
But you won't.
Well, that's not if staff is sitting in on the meeting, then
So we would still, either I or somebody from staff would still be part of all those meetings.
And that's mandatory?
If it's a standing committee, it's a Brown Act meeting, so we are doing this in that meeting. If it's an ad hoc committee, then maybe it's just the two of you and you guys have conversations and you have conversations with me, but eventually it all has to come through me.
Right. So, but there's a way to do it where we burn less staff time, where the committee brings the information together, discusses the options, and then brings them to staff to present to the board.
So if you were to set up an ad hoc committee, for instance, for landscaping, then the two of you could go and do some research, do some investigation, and then we would have to get together,
Right, okay.
go over it all, make sure that that's actually feasible, or put it all together for it to come to the board, and then it would come to the board. So in that instance, the ad hoc committee would save some staff time, but it wouldn't eliminate staff time.
No.
A standing committee, on the other hand, would require all the time it takes to set up this meeting again. So I prefer not to do that.
So for an ad hoc committee, that can tend to save time because they are limited in scope by the whole board. So rather than, if there's something that you take an interest in, or you and Director Davis or any other director take an interest in, you go out and investigate, but you're not limited in scope, right? You're going off on tangents, maybe you're asking all kinds of questions, maybe it brings up other things, but if you're working as the ad hoc committee, the board as a whole has decided, here's what you're gonna go investigate, here's what you're gonna go put together, here's what our goal is, and it serves as a strategy for efficiency if it's done correctly. And so it is to reduce more of the sporadic questioning and inundation of staff. And so you usually want to create such a committee for priority topics, right? You wouldn't want to have 5 ad hoc committees at a time.
No, for sure.
Yeah.
I agree with that, and I think that, to the point of saving staff time, if we were to look into the landscaping, irrigation, that kind of thing, if staff didn't have the time to do things, having an ad hoc committee of board members to do so free of charge is a benefit to the community and the district.
Especially if there's community members involved.
Yeah.
That gets you in a
That's what it's
standing
all about.
committee, and then you have to have regular meetings, Brown Act meetings. I don't think that would actually save staff any time.
It wouldn't do it.
A standing committee typically adds time and costs, always. Because you have more meetings, and instead of one board deliberating on something, you have 2.
The way I understood the last time we talked about this, okay, ad hoc, they have to come off the board. But a standing committee, I mean, we've got a lot of brilliant people in this little town. It doesn't have to be somebody from the board on a standing committee, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
So you would have 2 board members on the standing committee, but you could also have public.
You don't have to have any board members on the standing committee.
No.
Yes, I understand correctly.
You can have no more than 2, because otherwise you have a
Yeah,
quorum
it'd
of
still be
4.
2 with
If you were gonna
standing
have board
committee.
members, but a standing committee could be made up wholly of the public or of staff or a mix,
Right.
or it's really up to you.
Yeah.
And standing committees, in my experience, are most effective in situations where the board is looking for public oversight and information and not necessarily recommendations on what the board should do. It's
Right.
more, you don't maybe have as much time to gather as much public input or information or whatever it is, and you want it to be kind of consolidated into a standing committee to review it and then provide that information to the board, rather than recommending decisions, right? Things may come from it, but that's typically the most effective way to use a standing committee in my experience.
Thank you. Any other board points?
Well, I thought I heard you or Director Green say come back with recommendations. And I was wondering about that. So you just said no recommendations, just pure information, right?
No, they can. I mean, you can have an advisory committee that is meant to recommend things that the board is supposed to do. It's just if you're trying to save staff time and costs, that is not going to do it. It is definitely going to cause more staff time and costs because they're a Brown Act
Apologies.
committee.
Say you send out 2 people that you know are against that particular project, and we're sending them out to gather information, their recommendations when they come back are colored by their previously stated positions. So how is that fair?
I mean, you're all going to have your own positions on every item that comes before the board, and it's simply a recommendation. It's no different than
And, you know,
bringing it
talk about
to the
the
discussion
committee.
points.
Okay.
I mean, yeah, but it's, the board as a whole selects who's going to be on these committees, and certainly people are going to, unbiased people don't exist. They just don't. So you just try to put whomever you can in there that you think is going to do the best job of evaluating whatever it is you want them to evaluate. I mean, it's hard to control. And if it doesn't work, you disband it.
Anything else? No. Anything else? Good. Okay, we have public comment on this item.
This video show, sorry, this is my 3rd one, final one, I promise. Okay. I think you answered the question. I was looking to see if public would be involved in this. It'd be great to have a community involvement in all these small little decisions that are made. They're not small, they're not trivial, they're actually pretty big decisions. Having an ad hoc committee limits it to just, I believe, just to the board members. And yes, 2 friends can get together. I'm not saying it would, but it is possible that, other people may not want to work with the same board members. I don't know the politics of this board. But regardless, I think that is a concern that has been brought up. So probably having a standing committee may be a good idea in those situations. Not in all situations, but something like that where it impacts the community. I think the San Miguel Advisory Board has committees that involve the public in general. I think they they did some planning a while ago, and I've been on boards where we have brought in public comment, which makes it a little bit more, I think, a healthier institution. And I think a lot of people are interested to see from the attendance today, and hopefully it'll bring in more people into these meetings, and there's a good, healthy discussion on a lot of the topics. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other public comment? No. Anything from us? No, we have one more.
I guess just clarification, so standard committee, it can be just all public or public and the board?
A standing committee can be made up of all public, public mixed with staff, all three mixed with board members. It can really be anything because it's a Brown Act subcommittee. So if their meetings are public and there's no concern with any kind of collusion or decisions being made outside of the public eye, so they can make a standing committee of really whoever they'd like. It's really up to the board.
So if it's of all public and not, does it still have to have staff time?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
that
because
was
they'd have to have
my question.
regular meetings scheduled and the public would have to be available with agendas, and it'd be just like this, with a
Okay.
standing committee.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Rudy Shaw again. I really like the idea of an ad hoc committee, but I worry that if the committee comes with conclusions and delivers conclusions to the board, that could be sort of a slippery slope. But I really like the idea of an ad hoc committee coming and, or be informed to gather information and then present that information for the board to take action and make decisions from. I just wanted to make that comment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other public comment? Nope, all right. You need anything from us on this?
Well, so part of this item was also that Director Davis wanted to discuss creating either an ad hoc or a standing committee to review public projects. And so that has not been discussed
Okay.
at all. And now that you know the difference between ad hoc and standing committee and what that goes into, do you have a request, a more specific request on what you'd like to see?
Yeah, I'd like, I don't think it needs to be two board members like ad hoc. I think a standing committee, and like I said, there's, and I know them personally, there's a lot of very, very smart people in this community. And I think some of these projects, in my opinion, need to be kind of looked at, not overseen or anything. And then, you know, two heads is better than one. And that way there, they can bring their thoughts and ideas back to the board. And so there wouldn't be the two board members coming back and thinking, you know, and try to influence somebody, which I don't think that would happen anyway.
So what would be the scope of, like, what's the subject matter that this committee is looking at? Like, what is their purpose?
The purpose would be on some of the projects and so on, and lighting, landscaping, roads, and so on. And I know that the county is responsible for the roads, but this Mission Deli up here, there's no place to park, and you can't, if you pull in, you can't, that alleyway is rougher than a son of a gun, you know? And the new owners of that Mission Deli are really nice people, you know? And, so just kind of help the people out, or give ideas on how we can help the citizens of San Miguel maybe get something done, you know?
So I think any sort of committee would have to be within the purview of the district,
Right.
which would not include.
Oh, yeah, it would have to be in, yeah,
The example you used would have to go to the advisory committee.
Yeah, right.
But I agree on getting utilizing the information and the knowledge of people in the community.
Yeah.
To look at what the district does and offer remedies
Yeah.
if they're legit.
right.
I can see where it could work in certain instances.
Yeah.
So would the board like us to bring back an item to explain the process to set up a committee and to appoint people from the public to that committee? And what, in general, it sounds like it would be a committee to oversee public projects.
Projects that the district is involved in, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I say public projects, I only refer to what we're doing. I don't, not like roads or anything
Right.
like that.
That's a very broad
Yeah.
scope for one committee. I would suggest that you narrow
Case by case.
to either specific projects, or let's say it's, the wastewater treatment facility, or any landscaping and lighting improvements, or, right? So you want to have a narrowed scope, otherwise you're going to have a scattered committee that is not going to be helpful.
Yeah, that's true. Let me do that.
So what would you like people to provide input on specifically? Like what, as Councilwoman alluded to, the wastewater treatment plant, lighting and landscaping improvements downtown.
Wastewater treatment plant,
Start with that.
start with that.
Okay.
And the booster pump up there.
I think that's pretty necessary.
Well, I do too, but I think it could be done next week.
Oh,
No, I'm not. I'm not talking about in order to get it done there. 'Cause that booster pump could go right down there by the
If I can make a
SLP.
suggestion, and it would be for the board members, well, we can bring something back for discussion and possible action as far as a list of priorities, and start with what you think is the highest priority amongst all of you, right? Like come up with a list of priorities that a standing committee would be good for, and then you can decide on what the first task is going to be for this standing committee. And then you need to come up with a process for how you're going to select the standing committee, and that needs to be a discussion that you all agree on how you're going to, is there an application process? How long of a duration is the application process? Who will you all be appointing, or will you assign a specific board member to review the applications and make a recommendation, right? These are all things that will need to be discussed at the next meeting to decide on how it's going to work. And so that would be my suggestion on bringing it back to decide on the first priority for the standing committee, and then to decide on the process for selecting the standing committee. Well, first, we should probably figure out if all of you even want to form a standing committee, or at least a quorum of you.
If you were to bring information back, can you also provide an estimate of staff time based on a cadence of frequency for the meetings and/or something of that nature?
Yes.
Can also, it would be important to us making the decision, I think, so.
And the frequency of the meetings would be up to this board.
Yep.
So they do have to have regular meetings, but it doesn't necessarily have to be every month. And so it'd really be up to you on how often
Okay.
they're going to meet. So we can bring all that information back for an actual decision to be made
Okay.
next time.
I mean, I'd be interested in hearing that, sure. Directors? Sure.
Okay.
We can bring it back.
Yep. Okay.
So just for clarification, you all agree to bring it back for further information?
Yes.
Yes. Yes,
And possible action.
yeah, and, yeah, there you go.
Yeah. And you will make a priority list for the standing committees.
Right.
Don't forget to do your homework.
Okay, item number 8, authorize the general manager to execute contracts with SWCA Environmental Consultants in the amount not to exceed $15,819, and Geo Solutions in an amount not to exceed $9,160 for environmental and geotechnical work related to 0.625 million gallon main water tank access road improvements, and approve related budget adjustments by resolution 2025-27.
So this item is, it's not really a continuation, but a continuation of a previous discussion regarding the tank access road to the main tank on the west side of Highway 101. Two of the things that were requested by the board to come back for consideration and to accomplish before moving forward with contracting to actually replace any road sections were the environmental work that would be required and the geotechnical work that would be required, which is the two contracts that are being proposed. The environmental work will cover the entirety of the road. The geotechnical work will only cover the land bridge portion, as that's the only portion that was deemed necessary for additional environmental work. The rest of it after discussion with GeoSolutions, would not require any additional work on their part. So no additional work would be done. Both of these things would need to be accomplished before we move forward with any sort of repairs or adjustments for the road, other than minor repairs, which we've been undertaking on a regular basis. So again, these are proposed for the board to approve to move forward with these projects. Both SWCA and GeoSolutions can move forward pretty much immediately. It will take several months to accomplish the work, get the reports done, and get those approved.
So just to clarify, they're simply providing reports on what needs to be done? What is the scope of what they'll be doing?
So for the environmental work, they have to do a biological survey. They go around and look at what kind of flowers are there, what kind of animals are there, and they'll do that for the entirety of the road. They'll also do research into the archaeological record for anything that is been identified in that area, could potentially be in that area. So that'll take place. Those are usually, all we get out of that is a report, which most of it we can't even divulge to the public because it's confidential. That takes quite a bit of effort on their part, especially in new areas, which I don't have any other records of anything in that area, so they'll probably have to dig a little bit harder for that. And then out of that, they'll provide a report with either a negative declaration, which is that there's nothing that's of significance that could be harmed by fixing the road or replacing the road, or mitigated negative declaration, which is basically, here's the things you need to do in order to do this work. That's the case for the treatment plant. We have a M&D, and it has a big long list of things we have to do in order to do the work and to monitor and everything. In this case, I'm assuming that their recommendation is just going to be a negative declaration, which is not going to have any sort of stipulations on it. However, we won't know that until they finish that. On the geotechnical work, they're going to do boring and take samples and do compression tests on the soils to determine whether or not those soils are capable of actually bearing the load of the road like it should be. What the problems will be if we just change the road by grading it down, and what the problems will be if we decide to build it up or widen it. Widening it obviously is going to be the most problematic because we don't know how that land bridge was built. But that will all be part of their report. Will be the results from the sampling or the borings, identifying all the different strata, the results from the compression tests, and result in a report providing recommendations to the civil engineer on what they should do, and what sort of mitigation they'll need for to build out that road, whether it's some sort of a